Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I want to echo Paul's sentiments in thanking you for the opportunity to come here. It's been a long, hard road. I was sitting in front of you about over 2 years ago, and we offered our cooperation, and I don't know, somehow along the line, I think something slipped, and we didn't get a say-so. I have a quick PowerPoint presentation. I say that quick. What it is basically is a lot of the fire scene examination. What I've included along with it are some excerpts from 921. I think during the course of the, if you choose to ask questions, that's fine. I think we can move along a little more rapidly if we kind of wait somewhat till the end of the presentation.
You've given us some sound back there in the back.
These are basically the materials reviewed during the course of our investigation. I might add there, this particular slide was prepared by someone else at a different time, so there's some additions there. I actually traveled to Corsicana and met with many of the people that were involved initially on this for additional background information. This is a picture of the house in question without any other additions to it. The orientation is from the bottom facing north. The charge the fire investigators are looking at from the beginning, in this particular instance, the Corsicana Fire Department did their initial investigation 2 days after the fire. That was done strictly by the Corsicana Fire Department fire officials. After their initial investigation, our office was contacted, and Deputy Vasquez appeared on the 27th of December and was taken to the location and conducted a separate, without anybody else present, investigation. These are the essence of what we start looking for in a fire investigation. That's the front of the house. The clarity is not real good in front of the porch there. I guess the lighting here, I don't know if we can do anything about that. That would be the east side of the house. The bedroom in question is that room right here that we're looking at. That is the back side of the bedroom. That's looking at it from the south. You can see the orientation there. You can see how the fire progressed out those windows. That's the back door. That's the front porch. You can see the screen door off to the side, the remnants. The front door was totally consumed. That's the front door on your left. That's a side window that led into what they were using as their living room. That's the porch above, the ceiling above the porch. Quite a bit of the fire entered into that area, coming out the windows, kind of rolling around, not unusual. That's standing in the front doorway looking down the hallway. We've heard a lot about different V patterns there. As you can see, some off on the sides, or at this point they're not necessarily relevant. That's the kitchen in the background. The bedroom where the fire originated is to your left there. You can see one of the beds. You can see a Christmas tree off here down in the foreground. That's the room that is off to the right. Had very little fire impingement in it. That is looking in the bedroom where the fire originated. There's one of the beds. There's one of the other beds. That is the doorway that we're looking into from the hallway. There would be the windows would be over here off to your right. That's the same bed again that we were looking at in the previous photograph that sits protruding outside of the doorway. Those are the two windows that have the east orientation. So all in all, there were 2 windows in the front, 2 windows on the side, and 1 small window on the back. Those are the 2 windows again. Here you can see the electric socket. It's an older house, been wired after the fact. You can see the actual electric line running up, and there's it still has its protective cover. And then at the very top, I think you can see that the wire has been exposed. There's what was identified at the time by the investigators. Additional patterns. These are all inside that room, pretty much the center of the room. That's showing the depth. The particular floor had a carpet over it, and underneath that there was a linoleum. Underneath that there was some tar paper, and then there was a 3-inch plywood and a 3/4-inch plywood, and then the actual original flooring material, as you can see there. These touching. That's the front entryway. A lot's been talked about there. That's where the sample was ultimately taken. You can see various discolorations. I guess somebody might call that the old spalling up top on the other side on the concrete. There was a separation, approximately 1 inch, between the patio and the actual house that was built. That's not unusual in that kind of construction. Here you have that bed. That's the bed again that is kind of protruding out from the front door. There's the heater that was in the southeast corner of the bedroom. That's the back, that's the south window that we saw earlier, the small window. There would be 2 other windows over here. The particular bed that we've looked at would have been in front over this direction. That's where the 2 bodies were found. You can see the location from the door. The doorway would be straight here to your left. You can see the 2 windows in the front porch there to your right. There's where the sample was taken from the doorway. That's the remnants of 2 pool cues and the bottle of charcoal lighter fluid. This right here is the end of the patio as you're moving to the left. If you're looking at the house, it would have been to the patio. The door's on the right over here. It's at the end of the patio. There you can see the first step down. That's another picture of the front doorway. You can see where the sample had been removed. This is the ceiling. You look right here in the middle, right off to the side back over there. I believe you can see where the ceiling fan was located. That's another picture of it. There, the ceiling fan location. The box is over here off to the left. If you can see it. That's another picture of the main area of the pour area that they indicated, that they identified, and that's from the window. And there's the original drawing done by Corsicana Fire Department where they believed there was evidence of an accelerant. I place this here because I just want to show that, you know, what we're looking at. We've talked about the scientific methodology and the hypothesis drawn from those. This is strictly straight out of 921. Here's talking about the evidence levels of confidence. I think you'll be interested in this. Probability and possibility. This is an excerpt from Mr. Byler's report. In his presentation, I was somewhat taken back with the fact that it seems like I'm not really sure what reports he was reading, because once there was evidence of an accelerant that they felt they had seen, that's immediately what they did. They started taking samples. During the course of all of this, I've seen numerous programs, and it's amazing how, I guess, people want to make a good story out of something. This statement right here, it just minimizes, it seems to me, what the facts actually are. If you find an accelerant over here, evidence, the container, and the door wells over there, it automatically stands to reason that that explains the presence of that accelerant that you found over here, because something was being used over here. You saw one of the pictures in Nightline where they were scoping across that front porch, and they're telling their public viewers with a circle, here's where the accelerant was found, in the middle of the porch. Here's where and that's not the case. That was not the case where the barbecue pit or any of them. It's all the way at the end, a good 20 feet away. There's been a lot of discussion, and I'll defer to my experts over here in terms of in NFPA about what's termed the negative corpus. It's a terminology that's used, and I think this kind of understand it's when you can't explain a fire any other way, is there a possibility for you to reach the conclusion that it was an incendiary fire. Very difficult, obviously, very difficult situation. This gets into what NFPA is talking about, the purpose of fire and explosion investigation. The features can be grouped under the following 4 headings. Of significance, and this one is, I think, number 4 here. I think, Ms. Kerrigan, you had raised several questions, I know, in previous meetings about the nature of the human factor, and as you can see there, it encompasses acts of omissions contributed to the loss, such as incendiarism and negligence. My presentation today, I'll tell you, is not going to deal anything with that defendant, his conduct at all. We will be talking about, though, and again, I go back to Dr. Beeler's comments. I don't know where he said we did not, our folks and the Corsicana folks didn't talk to people. They talked to all the witnesses. They talked to all of the witnesses. The neighbors, the first responding firefighters. In fact, most of those people testified in court. So I really do not understand where he's coming from, that we did not follow some sort of accepted protocol and that we did not talk to witnesses. They talked to all of the witnesses that were there. We have some problems with this particular one, and where Mr. Bailey was writing in here, the injuries could not be created, but Mr. Vasquez's view of the fire is correct. It's unclear how Willingham could have entered a room with hot gas and layers. I indicated I didn't want to get into that, but again, I think it minimizes what actually happened when he makes those statements. We were recently in a meeting with a large group of fire marshals, and the comment was made about how derogatory both of the gentlemen here have said they're incensed somewhat about this. The fire tells a story. they all indicated that back in the early 90s when they were going through training, that's exactly the language that the instructors used. I mean, it seems to me that's totally insignificant. The fact that the gentleman uses a phrase, "the fire tells a story," I can't find anything where anybody would go anywhere with that one. We note ultimately the decision is to the level of certainty and data collected in the investigation or any hypothesis drawn from any analysis of the data rests with the investigator. This is a significant portion here. Now go into the investigation that was done by Mr. Fogg. He indicated we initially started looking for accidental causes. This is strictly Mr. Fogg, the Corsicana Fire Department. The stop along the east wall, the gas line along the east wall, we found it in the off position. They eliminated the space heater. They determined that space heater had been off. We started looking for electrical shorts for wiring, which was visible in the bedroom. We found no electrical shorts in the bedroom. We started going to the deep burn, lowest burn areas. Those were in the hallway and in that bedroom. We have to settle in our own minds that we've eliminated all accidental causes. It's significant down the last one. We had to take a look at all the contents that were in the room to determine what could have left these impressions. As you go through the debris, removing the debris off the floor, we found clothes, we found toys, plastic toys on the floor. To eliminate the plastic toys melting and running, we looked at the area around the remains of the plastic toys to determine whether they had run and produced these patterns. We found that they had not. All right? The last statement is where he's indicating that he was following the professional protocol by not trying to go through the fire scene with Mr. Vasquez. Now, we've heard discussion about eliminating the possibilities. Of course, the first two possibilities are going to be gas and electric. There's no way I could sit here and defend the lack of specificity that appeared in either one of the reports. When I first started working for the office in 1994, that was one of the first critical things that I brought to the attention of the office. You know, the brevity of writing in a report could be very critical at some point in time. But as you can see from here in the analysis, as you saw, it wasn't like they just walked in and said, oh, you know, look around and say, it's not electric, it's not fire. I mean, it's not gas. I think you saw the photographs yourself of the ceiling fan. There's no evidence of a fire originating there at all. They followed the protocol. They followed the practices that were available, being used at the time. Mr. Vasquez testified he used a systematic method, starting with perimeter examination, exterior examination, interior examination, going from least burn to most burn. And I conclude with irregular patterns are common in situations of post-flashover conditions. Long extinguishing times or building collapse. We didn't have building collapse. We did have somewhat of a long extinguishing, actually, we didn't have a long extinguishing time from the sense that it took the fire department a long time to put the fire out. From the best of our knowledge on a time frame, one of the witnesses said, pretty for certain, it looks like, she let children out the door at 10 o'clock because she knew a TV show was just starting. The children were the first ones to notice the fire, and they all agreed it was probably about 12 minutes. The child that actually noticed the fire indicated their first recollection was, I smelled smoke. I didn't do anything about it. And then I started seeing more, and I thought the house next door was on fire. Now, this is coming from, this is the house that burns. This is the house she thought was burning because of the smoke she was seeing from being in the backyard in the house 2 doors down. But you can see from here, you can see how the individuals, you know, they consider a flashover situation. As you can see, these patterns may result from the effects of hot gases, flaming and smoldering debris, melted plastics, or ignitable liquids. I think what you've heard today, and there's a lot of confusion about that, is just because you have the flashover situation, it doesn't totally remove any pattern persistence that might be discernible. It's a judgment call. It is. It ultimately comes down to a judgment call. You saw from the other slide, the previous slide, that based on that judgment call and the finding, the positive finding of an accelerant where it shouldn't be, was the basis of their conclusion. Now, I just close out kind of the presentation because ultimately today and then what happened at trial was an argument over what I just talked about in terms of an opinion that falls on basically these. There's the sample that was taken. These are what were determined to be evidence and accelerant. And I dare say today that if we had a case like this, and that evidence was presented and brought, we could have an expert on one side and an expert on one side, and we could probably go on for 2 or 3 days arguing about whether that was sufficient. And ultimately the jury would make that decision. What transpired back then, very similar. The new science, if you will, that has been brought to our attention, the crazing of glass, that was in 921, that in its original inception. When the fire investigators, and we can turn this off now if you want, the fire investigators that went in there were noting their responsibility was to note all of what were called indicators. They marked down, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing this. They're not focusing on just one thing. Ultimately, when we talk in terms of using the scientific methodology in developing hypotheses, once they started looking at the culmination of, and even, again, you can throw out the crazed glass, you can throw out the spalling, you can throw out even the multiple points of origin, because in essence what they were saying was all this pattern is tied together so it ultimately would flow together. Our position has been, and I think we stated, our original document that we sent to you listed all of various indicators that they had found. And our purpose in doing that was showing that back then, while there was no specific written standard that we would look at now and say somewhat, as attorney I say codified, but it's a written, there wasn't one. There was in fact and I think you've agreed that there was a standard that was acceptable protocol using procedures, policies, understanding, training that they had received. And they followed it. They followed it and wrote the report and came to their conclusion. Stand ready for questions?
Well, I think there has been some discussion about whether or not there was a standard previously. From what I have heard, I think everybody agrees that there was not a uniform written standard.
Absolutely not. There was not.
But there was perhaps some sort of standard that did not have near the detail that exists today, even if it wasn't uniform or codified, and that it was more or less accumulated knowledge.
I would agree with that. It was peer accepted to an extent, and I'm sure you had some rogues out there that, didn't necessarily follow it, but there was a body of peer accepted principles. And I think, again, I want to reiterate, that was the purpose in that document that we gave you that listed those. They were all there in 921 at its inception.
One of the things that I had asked Mr. DeHaan about was the nature of judgment making in the course of a fire investigator. And I made an awkward comparison to toxicology, which I think has more specific areas for comparison. Do you agree or disagree that there continue to be, back in 1991 and under 921, lots of room for fire investigators to exercise discretion and judgment in forming their opinion?
Absolutely.
This whole thing, some sort of mathematical formula.
There is no it is a judgment call, ultimately coming down to opinions, and that is something now. And I diverse here, but I think background and history is important on this. That there's an underlying tension, if you will, and I defer to you all at some point in time, between the scientific community and those folks that are actually doing the down and dirty field work out on the ground. That has existed for a long time. There have been numerous attempts to create a certification process, if you will, for just a new one called a fire analyst. And that's happened through the NFPA process, and it's been defeated. And the purpose of that was to say, we are the only ones that can make the call. We're the only ones that are trained sufficiently to make that call.
One of the, I think, bigger, important, overriding tasks that the Forensic Science Commission faces, and it's something I think we've discovered in the course of this and other cases that we've talked about, is the notion of how does a community, and for this we're just going to limit it to Texas, know when it is the right time to take a field and make it a field that has to be more specifically accredited or certified for individuals, as we have done in a fair number of fields. Certainly in the example DNA, there are very rigid rules about who can do the testing and rigid rules about interpretation of the results and what you can say in the courtroom. And then you have the spectrum of all kinds of other forensic fields where they're at different levels of maturity on that. Where would you now describe fire science and fire investigation in that field, and should we eventually get to a point where we are certifying the people who do the investigation?
Excuse me, I didn't hear the last part.
And should we eventually certify the people who investigate and testify?
Well, the individuals that testify are all certified. Let's go back just a little bit on our folks. Mr. Vasquez had been certified. Mr. Vasquez was not a just individual that we brought out off the street, and said go out and investigate fires. Mr. Vasquez had had 6 years experience, over 6 years experience with our office as an investigator. He was certified as a fire investigator and law enforcement. He had
When you say certified, who is doing that
the
certification?
Texas Commission on Fire Protection, the Texas agency.
Is that
And
an agency that's separate from the fire marshal's office?
Yes, absolutely. They are the ones that certify, and it's interesting to note, at this very point in time, at the time that was going on, not only did we have Dauber starting to create a lot of turmoil in the scientific community, but we also had court cases that were developing in terms of what standards are we going to use to hold these individuals to testify. But again, I know shortly after 9/21, I started working, and the commission immediately started redoing all of their curriculum, because their curriculum, while it may have addressed this principle and this protocol and this procedure in the past, it didn't reference it in terms of 9/21.
Right.
So they had to go back and redo all that.
To what extent did you find that the protocols and principles and processes that were being followed by the fire marshal's office coincided with 9/21? Or was this a new dawning day?
No, they were identical, if you will.
Because I think the perception that the public gets, and I think the media sometimes portrays, is that there were these two things going on. There was a bunch of really smart people developing 9/21, and then there was a bunch of bumpkin fire investigators off in their little world doing fire investigations. And while those two entities for a fair period of time were separated, would it be fair to say that there was a fair amount of intermingling of knowledge on that by 1991, to the point where 9/21 was not a total revelation?
Absolutely, and that's correct. But and I want to say this, and I'm speculating, it's opinion, but that's not to say there weren't some bumpkins out there that weren't following it.
Sure.
But I want you to understand that as far as our jurisdiction, the state fire marshal back then, and most major city jurisdictions, Buddy can speak to that, were following the acceptable practices. They were obtaining the same training. The organizations like the International Association of Arson Investigators were putting out the training. They were doing it. One of the critical things in all of our jobs that we do today is the ability to pass down that scientific information, transform it down to the level where it's being used on a day-to-day basis.
I want to go back to the certification and help me with like a 3-sentence summary of what a fire investigator had to do back at that point to become certified.
He had to have at least 120 hours of training that was put on by acceptable trainers. Number one, certified trainers that were teaching a certified curriculum.
Okay, so he goes to classes. What else?
So he goes to classes, and that was fairly much where you were at.
And how does he achieve the certification? Does he have to take a test? Does he just
Yes.
have to finish the class?
Yes, no. Ultimately, you have to take the test. You have to take the
What
test.
sort of a test was given?
That was based on, at the time, those were based on Mr. Kirk's book that had been published. They were based on various treatises that had been created by the scientific community, by the International Association of Arson Investigators, by NFPA, by NICET, by various organizations.
Did you take that test?
I never have. I'm not an arson investigator. I'm an attorney.
My condolences. What's changed since 1991 to now regarding certification? What would a fire investigator do today to get to that same certification?
About the same thing. About the same process.
Do you think that should change?
I'm not going to speculate that should change. I've worked with our folks. I've worked with individuals in the field, and I don't know that
I'm not trying to put you in a bind here. Let me put it this way. If you got to build your perfect certification system, what else would you put in there?
You can't ever add too much training.
Well, give me a
You
couple
know?
of examples, though.
You want to say 120 hours, 120 hours plus, and I say this, and I'll probably get in trouble with my boss. There is something to be said. I'll probably get in trouble with a lot of people on this one. There is something to be said about an individual who's required to have a college degree. Okay? And we probably all know individuals that have college degrees and can't milk a cow, put gas in their car. But there is something to be said as a generality that you have completed a process, you've completed an ability, you've shown, you've demonstrated some ability to write better, to maybe comprehend alternative points of view better. That could be an addition.
And
2 years of writing.
And that's not an unusual standard in a lot of other forensic fields, is it?
No, it's not.
What about like continuing education after the certification to keep certification?
Yeah, and again, when I'm talking about this, we're not Texas is not a cowboy state. We probably lead the nation in a lot of areas, and in Texas, for the most part, when I talk about our guys, they're all required to be both TCLO certified and commission certified. In order to
help people in their own TCLO certified means he's a peace officer.
He's a peace officer, and there's good reasons for that. While we've moved in that direction. But each one of those requires continuing education. Each one of those.
That certification is renewed how often?
Every what? Every year. Yeah, it's renewed annually, and the continuing legal education requirement's 20 hours in each. Our folks average 48. Our folks average 10 years experience. We've got some 20. We've got some, but the average is 10.
All right. That's great at the state level, the fire marshal's office. What was the experience level and the presence of certification at the local level? I know that we had
It'd be the same.
It would be the same?
It'd be the same.
Through the same certification process?
It's the same certification process.
So if you want to be a fire investigator associated with the fire department for the city...
Well, of course, Corsicana, you had to take the 120 hours. You had to take the same course issued that was approved by the commissioner.
Was the
Yes.
And he was certified?
But they were certified.
Okay.
Can I ask I want to ask a technical question about the presentation, because I know Dr. Byler has to leave, I think, at 2. So I'd like to address some of the, a couple of technical issues. You had a slide, and it's not there at the moment, but it showed essentially a floor plan of the building.
Yes, ma'am.
And there was a blue highlighted area.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you say that was the area where they observed the patterns, or where they believed the accelerant was on the floor?
Pattern area.
Pattern area.
Pattern area.
Those were the burn pattern areas.
That's what they deemed suspicious, if you will.
Okay, but just to distinguish the two, those were the patterns, rather than where they believed the accelerant was on the floor. And then at the porch towards the entry of the building.
It extended out towards that area.
Right, and the positive chemical test was
It's
found.
at the very end of that.
Right, so it was on the porch. Correct?
On the porch. No. It was inside.
Right, but right by the door.
Part of the house. Yes.
Okay. And how many pieces of evidence were removed from the residence and tested?
That was the only one taken from that spot. As best of my recollection, there was one other one taken from there back further, and there were, I think, at least 6 that were taken in the room, at least.
Right, in the room where they believed
In the room
where
where
the
they
origin
believed-
of the fire was. So that would be the logical place. You don't
Yes.
have to be a fire investigator to
Yes.
figure that out. So when they removed evidence from the bedroom where they believed the fire had started, those tests were negative, understanding that there are reasonable explanations why tests are negative after the fact, but the others were all negative. Okay.
Following up on something when you said when she asked about the sample that was taken from the porch area, did you say that it was inside of the house?
Well, it wasn't on the porch.
So the threshold.
It was on the threshold,
So if
So it
the
was-
door is closed, where is the sample?
right underneath,
Underneath the door?
right underneath.
Okay, so well, I didn't want to be clear, that it wasn't literally inside of the house. It was under,
It would be underneath.
got it. That's what I thought, okay.
We all know there were no written standards in 1991, or we allege that. When did the written standards come, were established and codified?
Yeah.
Can we have a copy of that?
Well, in '92 was the first publication.
Not the 921, your written standards.
We don't,
Your
we,
SOP.
our SOPs? Our SOPs, we have a current one. I don't know, we have records retention schedules. I wouldn't begin to think that, I don't have an SOP that I can provide you that was used in 1991.
Could you?
I could
at least
probably
conduct a search and give us an answer?
Look for one, but I doubt, we'll have something like that. We have pretty strict record retention schedules, and things like that are not going to be kept.
Would you be willing, though, to
Sure,
conduct a
absolutely.
search and just
Absolutely.
send us a written answer whether they do
Absolutely.
or don't exist?
In conjunction with the commission.
Could we have a copy of your file?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Lee?
Can you, if you have a copy here, otherwise email it to Lee?
Yeah, I left her with 2 printouts that have the entire, the whole printout, so she can give them to you more rapidly.
How does the State Fire Marshal's Office disseminate changes in scientific standards or principles of fire investigation?
Well, primarily it's done through our training, obviously, our individuals. And I might say, we try and send them to the best available training that's out there. Now, and I hate saying this, but the reality of it is that sometimes those trainings are very expensive. But I might add, we have attended training that was put on by Dr. DeHaan. I personally just went to one, and numerous of our individuals went to one that was put on by Mr. Langtini. So we try, as members, most of our guys are either members of North Texas Central or what? North Texas, it's Fire Investigators Association, that are affiliates with the IAAI, which is the national organization. And those training seminars, again, I was talking about how we disseminate the information from the scientific community down, how we get that down. They're pretty much, it's all certification process too that goes all the way down. And Texas isn't alone in this process. I mean, it's pretty much, this is all done basically a national standard basis.
Does the Fire Marshal's Office itself produce training?
Very little for other folks. That's an area where Sunset has requested that we provide that in areas. But again, you have communities that will have most of the larger communities, and I say that, let's say Corsicana, way back then, they had their own certified folks. But there are other communities that don't. Now, we're not authorized necessarily to provide that certification training. That's done primarily through the TEACS program. TEACS is the one that's pretty much the authorized individual that does the training. We do have and participate in an annual conference that we put on, State Fire Marshal's Conference, that we put on that is attended by well over 200, approaching 300 now. Very successful, where we bring in education. We do have an annual conference here that is put on, an arson conference that is put on, that has some of the best experts in the world that comes in and talks to statewide individuals that come in and offers them training. As far as our office itself, we have internal peer review process that we use on cases where the guys get together, as a team with their supervisors, and they go over, here's what I found, discussing new techniques, anything that has come up. Some guy's got something new, finds out, word spreads. But it's primarily through external education.
When a fire investigator conducts an investigation and writes his report, back in 1991, how would his work be reviewed by his agency?
To be honest with you, I do not know.
Okay.
When I came in, again, like I said, I came in 94, in August of 94, and that was one of the first things that we installed.
Was peer review?
Was a peer review. The
So
supervisor.
describe how that works now.
Well, back then, what was done was the report came in, and a lot of it was driven by other factors. I don't want to be so altruistic to say we were doing it just to improve quality. But there was definitely a movement to improve quality. But what was happening a lot of times, we get a tremendous number of open records requests. And as a result of that, somebody has to read them. Somebody has to read them and go back and review these cases. I was the someone that was doing that. And as a result of that, I was looking at them and I was saying, this is not good, this is not good. Got together with the head of staff and we started a process where we were saying no report was going to be marked final, available for open records until the supervisors looked at it, checked at it, gone back. And we weren't telling them what to say, but we were telling them fill in the blanks.
Well, and that's kind of a standard practice for a lot of police agencies who
That-
have supervisors reviewing offense reports. So you're saying this process began in 94?
I can't say for sure that the process wasn't there in terms of what the supervisors were doing. I know my participation in it and the structure that we did came in 94.
And I assume then that you would agree that that's a pretty critical task to have in an agency for quality control.
What?
And give me an example of the kinds of things you can notice and fix by just having that.
Well, one of the main ones is again, I always put it jumping from A to C with the leaving B out. You know, you're leaving your conclusions. I think one of the first ones we did, we're looking at, is the individuals over here has challenged the report because it didn't say we looked at all of these hypotheticals, the potential for having, the ceiling fan, for the potential for having electrical. We didn't. If you don't articulate it and you don't write it out and spell it out, you're leaving yourself subject to attack. What's more, if you leave it out and you start testifying it later on, testifying in court later on, you're putting yourself in even more trouble.
Yeah.
So that was one of the concepts we tried to get across, and it wasn't that those concepts weren't there. I'm not saying they just weren't there. It's just we started more of a movement to develop in a more formatted situation. There was a lot going on back there during this time. I mean, we had a Supreme Court that was looking at Dauber cases, that was looking at one of the biggest ones, I don't recall, it was in 99, I believe it was, where they actually said, wait a minute, Dauber is going to apply, it's just not for the scientific community, it's for technical community too, it's for any specialty. You hold yourself knowledgeable, and we're going to hold your feet to the fire, and you're going to show us how you're a specialist.
Well, wouldn't you agree that that kind of review could also perhaps speed along the process by which we discard scientific grounds that have been proven to be inappropriate? So, for example, back in 91, if an investigator used crazing of glass as a factor to determine whether something was arson, he likely, assuming there was no peer review back then, he didn't have somebody catching that and changing it before it became an offense report and used in court. Whereas nowadays, I'm assuming if you were doing a peer review of an offense report and saw the mention of crazed glass as a contributing circumstance to think this was arson, you'd stop that.
And I say yes, but there's a certain caveat that I would put it. Back in 91, had you looked at that and it said crazed glass, you would take it for what it was.
Right.
It's in 921 now. It was back in literature back then.
Right.
So was Spaulding. There was a lot of literature that carried all of these, and mind you, the new science in most instances, particularly in flashover, doesn't say, okay, this has totally changed. I mean, you use the phrase.
Crazing is, I think we all agree, crazing is out, right?
It's out.
If crazing was in a report that came to you today, What reaction would you have to it?
Why are you putting it in there? You know, why are you subjecting yourself to this?
Well, it might even lead to further questions like, where have you been?
Where have you been? Right.
But do you continue to review those reports?
I review many reports.
Do you see an improvement
Absolutely.
over time?
Absolutely. But you know what? I still say the same thing. You know, it's a process. It's a process. Some are better than others. And it's honest to God truth. Some are better than others. And we work with those that need improvement. And, you know, you scratch your heads and you work towards the improvement. We're always trying to figure out ways how to improve. And again, you know, if there's anything in terms of the scientific knowledge, you know, we welcome it. We absolutely welcome as much as possible. And again, I was talking about training. You know, there's a couple of classes that the International Association puts on, you know, big, good, beautiful training classes, last a week long. Those are $700 and $900 to attend in Boca Raton, Florida, or San Diego, California. For me to send my staff for a week, transportation, hotel, you know, food, meals, and then I don't think the governor or the citizens of Texas are going to like me spending my money that way.
Actually, I think they probably would.
Yeah.
You know,
They probably kick in for it.
I have a question for you. Please help me to clarify. The expert hired by this commission has concluded that there is no scientific basis to call this an arson.
I don't think he's.
He basically says that he will leave it undetermined. And Dr. DeHaan also has agreed that he would probably call this an undetermined fire. The cause of the fire is undetermined. Do you disagree with that opinion? Do you think it's only a matter of opinions?
Yes, I disagree with
Do
him.
you still think that
Yes,
there
I
is
disagree with
scientific evidence to call
Yes,
it an arson?
yes. And I think I pointed that out earlier in my statement, that in looking over the trial, which is a whole different other thing, they didn't discuss Spaulding. They didn't discuss crazed glass. They discussed those issues that we looked at on the board. You know, were those poor patterns. And I might add, the caveat here, and again, I may get myself in trouble, just like science has changed the way we do things and think of things and can add and make us better, so has the legal community. So has just about any other community. And I don't want to be critical of the attorneys that handled the case back then, but they could have done a better job. They could have, had they been more educated.
So
if you'd have had a trained attorney on each side, you know, on each side that knew fire science and had tried cases before on that, and you had the two experts on each side, you'd gone on that trial for weeks on those issues.
So let me understand you well. What you are contending is that you fault them for brevity as far as the report writing is concerned, but you still stand behind them and you still consider the conclusions that they reach are correct and scientifically sound.
I believe that the conclusions that they reached
based on current standards
can be scientifically sound.
Can be or are.
I can't say with an absolute that they are. I mean, I wasn't there. I mean, I would prefer if we could go back and look and examine those scenes. We're looking at photographs. You know? That's it. That's what we have to go by.
In a letter that the commission received from the state agency with the fire marshal's office, I think there was a statement made, and correct me if I don't say it correctly, that you stand behind the investigation that was conducted in 1991 and that you would reach the same conclusion if given the same set of circumstances. Is that what you're finding today?
And that's pretty much what our position is today. And let me go back and state that I think one of the things that's a shortcoming that I've seen today is the standard and the criticism that being leveled to us has not been set back. Where are their scientific methodology that tests their conclusions? They've thrown up hypotheticals. A 1-year-old child starting a fire. Are we dealing with probabilities, possibilities there?
Well,
Are we?
That's why I'm determined, because in those instances where you're unable to these.
Are we dealing with, okay, the individuals said they tested the electrical system, they looked at the lines, they looked for shorts. Are we calling them liars now, or are we saying we don't have sufficient information, that he doesn't, that I don't, that you don't, you do? What are we saying at that point? The gas was off. The mysterious third person that could have come in the door. We used to run a joke in the old days about the bird that picked up the cigarette and dropped it down the fireplace and started the fire. You can come up with hypotheticals, but again, weigh them out, test them. Where has the testing been of their hypotheticals that have been raised? Where has that testing been? The media hasn't tested them. The media is going to take and run. We killed an innocent man. That's what they're looking at.
In the case of Mr. Vasquez and his findings, it seems like even though there wasn't a codified, uniform standard of practice at that time, he, on the other hand, fully understood flashover because he testified and knew what it was. He also said that the pattern could be produced by some other means other than an accelerant. He understood that. It seemed to me he had had quite a bit of education and training about investigation of fires because he used several of the methods that were later put into the 921.
Not only him, but the other, Mr. Falk, both of
But
them.
you stand by the conclusion that the decision that was made was sound and just, even though Mr. Vasquez said no, this pattern in the floor could have been caused by some other means. He understood that and recognized it as an investigator.
Well, I think what he was saying is that as we put it out in 921 says that flashover could have been caused by what? Drop down. Was there drop down in this instance? You saw that ceiling. There wasn't any evidence of drop down. You saw the testimony of Mr. Falk.
But there are multiple causes besides drop down. I'm not a fire investigator.
Well, and I'm looking at that. We're looking at 921. Well, let's talk about flashover. Let's talk about that flashover. What are they? Those patterns. They went to the extent. They haven't. They I guess poo-pooed, minimized the investigation or didn't read it. But they went to the extent. I know the Corsicana Fire Department investigation went to the extent of looking at where the toys had melted, where things in identifying clothing, and looking at those different patterns. Again, flashover, the occurrence of flashover doesn't mean you would never say that accelerant was used. And I think that was indicated.
Mr. Salazar, I think one of the things that gets complicated in a case like this is that the experts who look at this and review it are once removed from the scene that the fire investigators had. They were on scene. I think we'd all agree that actually being there, interviewing the people face to face, seeing things, at least theoretically, gives you a better set of data than reading it from someone else. The other part of this that concerns me, and I'd like to hear your comments on it, because you're not only familiar with the arson field, but are a lawyer and understand how things happen in the courtroom, is much of the information that these experts are jumping to these conclusions about are the result of questions that are being asked by lawyers in a courtroom. Questions such as, does flashover, have other causes? Well, yes, it does. Jumping then to the conclusion, well, he didn't eliminate those causes. Do you see the use of a trial record as causing any problems in understanding what these investigators did?
Absolutely. I hope I pointed that out earlier. We as attorneys have a large say-so in what ultimately comes out in the trial. If I ask the certain questions, I can lead it down, and if counsel on the other side isn't articulate enough, knowledgeable enough to know how to get back to where he wants to go, it's a game that's played back and forth. And I don't mean to play it, it's a game. It's our legal system. It's the way we operate. And it may be unfortunate, but it is the best system we have. Are there ways to improve it? Yes, there are.
So if for example, the defense attorney had asked the question of Mr. Vasquez, isn't it possible that a bird did in fact pick up a cigarette off of the street, fly over that chimney, drop it down, and it started a fire? His answer could well be, yes, that's possible.
As a truthful manner, he would have to say, but the possibility of it happening, yes, it is.
Would you then think
possible.
that becomes an alternate hypothesis that should defeat a conclusion that this is arson?
Depends on if you've got an agenda or not. No. As a scientist, as
Well,
a
how are you
fact
eliminating
finder.
it? How are you eliminating it? Because you can't scientifically eliminate that.
Just common sense and reason, cognitive reasoning, deduction, possibilities, probabilities.
One of the most interesting slides, and I think the slide that frankly is the most important piece of information that you gave up there, was from the 921 that talked about how ultimately every single investigator has to accumulate data and form a conclusion from it. And isn't that where differences of opinion come from?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So one investigator could well say, look, in my experience, it is ridiculous to think that a cigarette dropped down that fireplace. I don't see anything here that even remotely suggests it, and it's an event that is very unlikely to occur, so I'm not really going to discard arson on that basis. Another expert might say, I'm being paid a lot of money from a defendant, and all I have to say is, yeah, I think that's possible. I can't exclude them. They're both right, aren't they?
They are, absolutely. That's one of, again, getting back to the education side of it and transmitting that scientific knowledge back down. Most of the scientific research that's being done, and I believe they alluded to it, it's being done over here on the high dollar level. You have a large loss, you're going to spend a lot of money fighting with the insurance companies back and forth over here. It's not conducted down on a criminal case where somebody's been charged with arson. You don't go out and spend a bunch of money on experts. In the particular case here that we're talking about, the defense was authorized and went out and found an expert. He reviewed the information and concluded they were right. So that's 3 investigators that agreed at the time.
Can I just clarify, so your office re-reviewed all of those documents?